Welcome to The Pie, a production of the University of Chicago's Becker-Friedman Institute for Economics. I'm your host, Tess Vigland. Economic literacy is not a great strength in the U.S. population. According to the TIAA Institute PFIN Index for 2024, American adults correctly answered just 49% of basic financial questions. 49%. A program here at the University of Chicago is trying to help change that equation with a curriculum called Economics for Everyone. That's economics for, the number 4, everyone. Today we're talking with two of the UChicago scholars involved in E4E about how you bring economics to the masses and do it without a bunch of math. We taped this conversation in person at the Becker-Friedman Institute for Economics in Chicago. Well, welcome, gentlemen, to The Pie. Let's have you introduce yourselves real quick.
I'm Robert Shimer. I'm a professor of economics at the University of Chicago.
I am John List, and I'm also a professor.
And you are also...
I'm also the director of the Becker-Friedman Institute.
There we go. Well, John...
Do like where I look here and come back to you.
Yeah. Look wherever you want. And that's actually a good reminder to our audio audience that we are now on YouTube. So you can go over to YouTube and watch this conversation. Just search for Becker-Friedman. So John, welcome back. We had you on the show last, I think, in early 2003. So it's good to have you back. Let's start with you as the founding faculty member of this program. Why and how did this start?
Yeah, it really has kind of a simple beginning. About maybe a decade ago, Steve Levitt and I started chatting about how it's a shame that the chemist or the biologist or the humanist never has a shot to take econ. We felt that if you come to the University of Chicago, it makes perfect sense that you go through at least one econ course. But then when you looked at our offerings back then, it was around 2015, you would find courses that are excellent courses, but they're not really meant for the major in biology who wants to learn about economics. So we said, can we create a class that takes all of the economies, all of the math out, but keeps the beauty of the economic approach, and we can teach it to these undergrads who are not our majors. Now, we started teaching the course in 2017, so that was our first run. We had a very sympathetic chair back then who said, sure, go ahead and do it. It's just a wonderful chair back around that period from 50.
Who was that chair?
That's me. So with your chair, you can get these kinds of courses through. You know, there's less red tape.
You don't have to ask a lot of
people. You know, I asked myself to sign it. But to be honest, the idea was so obvious that our colleagues, Rob and others, said, of course, we should be doing that. It started as a non-major course, but now, when you fast forward, it really is a course that's taken by a bunch of biz econ majors, a bunch of econ majors, but also the divinity school and the humanists and the psychologists, they're taking it too. So it ends up filling a really important need. And now, of course, Rob's on board doing Economics for Everyone macro. So anytime you have a healthy idea and a good idea, you hope for expansion. And that's exactly what we've been doing.
How do you teach economics without math?
That's a great question. It's really a challenge. I think in some ways, first of all, math can be extremely useful as a means of communication in economics for people who are very fluent in math, but it also serves as a barrier to entry for people who are not good at math. And it serves as a crutch for instructors. The economics classes have the risk of becoming an applied math class instead of teaching economic ideas. So in starting to think about how to teach this class, we really stepped back and we asked, if you have 9 weeks to explain important economic ideas to people, what are the ideas that you want to explain? And the answer is not going to be how to solve a constrained optimization problem. So if these people are only going to see economics once, what are those ideas that they want? And so we started thinking about, we want people to understand things about how the world works around them, the kinds of policy questions which come up a lot, and centered our class around getting our students to a place where they could understand how to think through important policy questions that are hitting in the U.S. and around the world today.
Can you give an example of what that looks like? So I don't know, I'll throw out markets, but you can choose whatever you want. How do you teach that without the math?
Yeah, so we have, I think week 2 of the class is explaining the wonders of markets. And so there's an allusion to, without a formal proof, of what we call the first welfare theorem, this idea that markets are able to achieve amazing outcomes. And I could give you a formal proof of it, but I think if I did that, you actually wouldn't really appreciate the marvels which are in there, because I'd write down a very simplified economy. So we go back instead and we talk about Hayek and we talk about Friedman. So Hayek had these ideas that markets are just an amazing way of reducing the huge amount of information which is out there, and reducing it to the relevant dimensions for you as a participant in the market, as a consumer or as the manager of a firm, the things that you need to know about the economy. And Friedman emphasized that markets are very good at getting people who are interested in acting broadly in their self-interest and helping themselves, their family, their communities, whatever is their interest, in getting them to try to work hard in order to do that. And those are the ideas that get you to the first welfare theorem. And I think understanding Hayek and Friedman is more fundamental than understanding the math which is behind the first welfare theorem. So that's what we try to explain to them.
No, that's a great start. I think where you want to finish it is, so I put up a demand curve and put up a supply curve and say, this is a market. There's a market demand curve. There's a market supply curve. And I ask them, do you have any questions about that? And they say, well, what happens in this market? And you say, there's a concept called equilibrium, and that's where prices should tend toward and quantities should tend toward. And that's where the demand curve intersects the supply curve. And then I say to them, what do you all think? And at that point, they're a little bit nervous because they've never seen this kind of construct before. And I said, you know what? When I was an undergrad, I raised my hand and I said, what is the empirical evidence for that prediction? And that's a difficult one because we don't always see demand curves out in the field, so to speak. In fact, there are entire industries of consultants and economists who are trying to estimate demand curves for places like Uber and Walmart, et cetera. Sure. So these are hard to construct in and of themselves. And by the time you construct it, it may have changed in shape or changed in location. So the best thing at that point is to say, let's have you participate in a market. Mm-hmm. And let's set up a market ourselves and make some people demanders and some people suppliers. And I'm going to put a prediction in this envelope. I'm going to seal the envelope and put it at the front of the room, and we're going to run this market. The envelope will have a prediction about what I think price is going to be and what I think quantity is going to be. And at the end, what happens every time? The envelope is right.
Wow.
Economic theory works. So I think bringing alive the concept of the market, having people not only be the chef, but also the ingredients, and have them experience what is going on, then you really learn about, I see how a market works. I see how I acted. Now, within that, you learn the law of demand. You learn the law of supply. You learn about incentives. You learn about rationality. These are foundational concepts in economics, and you learn them all with a hands-on experience. I think put all this together, the student walks out with a fundamental understanding of why markets are important and how they operate. And importantly, some ideas about when they won't operate well and what we need to do.
Yeah, so actually where we go from that is to a long list of places where we don't use markets, where the government intervenes and prevents market transactions from happening. And so we have a long discussion, for example, about rent control. You can talk about minimum wages. We could spend probably the rest of the podcast from me listing examples of places where governments intervene in markets, and then use that as a takeoff to, okay, so what's why would you have rent control? What's the problem that rent control is trying to solve? And then ask questions about whether it's actually capable of solving the problems that it's intended to solve.
So describe a bit more, maybe John, you could take this, about what is on offer here. So you have the classes here on campus, but that's not all. I was going through all the videos that you have on the website, and I mean, that's just an extraordinary amount of education that's available out there for people.
Yeah, that's right. So remember, E for E means economics for everyone.
Everyone.
So what started as an idea about let's give everyone on campus the Chicago-style economics, where it's gone is let's try to give everyone in the world this way of thinking. Because if you step back and think about it, economics as a science helps us understand the world. It helps us give advice to individuals, organizations, governments, firms, nonprofits. But it also teaches us how to think. I can't think of another science that is like economics, that allows you to solve real-world problems from the boardroom to the living room, and allows you to think about a problem in a different way. Now, when we teach people how to think, it's important to say we're not teaching people what to think.
Yeah.
I think that's what, let's say, AI tends to do, the new innovator on the block, so to speak, what dictators might try to do. We're really about, look, here's a problem. Here's how an economist approaches that problem. If you eschew that type of thinking, that's fine. We just want people to understand, how does an economist think about a problem? Because I think once you learn about that, it really, let's be honest, economics is life and life is economics. So it begins to make you understand these everyday decisions. So what have we done? We've created 44 videos now that are online.
60, I think.
Is it 60 now?
Yep.
Keeps moving faster and faster. 60 videos that are online on...
And they're highly, highly produced, very professional.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
So we've worked very hard on that. And that's meant to be, say, from high school to a 90-year-old can watch these. And I've had several people approach me and say, hey, I watched some of your videos and I really got a lot out of the markets one, or the discrimination one, or the charitable giving one, or the rent control one, et cetera, et cetera. So videos, they were really meant to go to the high schoolers and give, a lot of high schoolers never have a shot to take a proper econ course.
Yeah.
And that's whether you're in a rural part of the country or an urban part. In many cases, it tends to be a person, even in those high schools that have the class, it tends to be a non-expert. So we want to give the student a shot. I think it's a one-stop shop to, if you really understand our videos, if you're a high schooler, you will be able to pass the AP test in micro. And I'm very happy with those videos. But again, they're not just for high schoolers, they're really for everyone.
Yeah, but it seemed like you were definitely at least partially targeting the TikTok audience, because they're great. They're short. They're like less than 10 minutes. Which is way longer than a TikTok video, but...
No, I love that you brought that up, because we beta tested all these. So we started with 45 minutes to an hour.
Oh, boy.
And we sent those out.
Yeah.
And wow, were those horrible. People hated those things.
That's homework.
They hated those things. So then what we went down to, we whittled it down to 3 parts. So if you have consumer surplus, for example, the consumer surplus has me sitting right here in this room, in fact, is where most of these videos were produced. I'll explain consumer surplus in, say, 5 to 8 minutes. And it will be with examples like Uber.
Mm-hmm.
What does consumer surplus when you take an Uber mean, et cetera, et cetera. Now comes the whiteboard. So a different person will teach roughly a 5-minute whiteboard on here's consumer surplus graphically. Never math, but graphically. Here's what consumer surplus means. And then they explain it in their way, in their intuition. Then, finally, we do have a TikTok for everyone. So speaking of TikTok.
Oh, I guess I didn't get that part.
Everyone also has a TikTok, and these are hilarious because the guy who did it, his name is Greg, the guy who did it is just hilarious. He dresses up in all kinds of different costumes.
Oh, I'm going to go look at those this afternoon, yeah.
Have you seen these?
I've seen some of them.
They're hilarious, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's, look, it was fun to do all that, but there are a lot of fun things we can do with our lives. We did it because we want to change the world. And we tried to do it in many different types of ways because we think these topics are important and interesting.
Yeah. Robert, how did you decide what to cover and what not to cover? What was the level of economic education that you were going for? Like, what didn't fit?
Let me say the videos, I really have not been involved with the videos to this point, but I can speak about other parts of the outreach from Economics for Everyone. So actually, after John was done being chair, I was chair for 6 years. And while I was chair, I went out and met a lot of alumni, a lot of other people with interest in University of Chicago and University of Chicago economics. And so many of those people were really, really excited about what we were doing on campus with Economics for Everyone. So I don't know how many people told me, I wish that class existed when I was an undergraduate here, or I wish my university offered a class like that.
I wish mine did.
And so what we realized, certainly I realized, is we can produce high quality videos, but you can't make people watch them. You need some way to have outreach there. You need to explain what's in there to teachers. You need to offer complementary material to teachers. So what we've been working on is how to take the work that we do here and scale that up to something that can be taught to thousands or hopefully many more millions of people around the world. And I think one really good example of where we're doing that is in Chile. So there's a program that we're running through a university called Universidad del Desarrollo in Santiago. That program has a point person who's in Chile, is an expert on economic education. It works with the Spanish language version of those videos. So on the same website, there's a Spanish tab for those videos. And she is working on two things. One is directly teaching students herself and through a small team there. And I think they're reaching something like 700 students this year that way. But she's also working on teacher training in Chile. And the teacher training is in taking the topics that agreed by us and her, the most important topics to teach, teaching teachers how to teach that to their students. And so we're indirectly reaching about, I think, 6,000 or 7,000 students this year through the teacher training program. And this is our pilot year of that program. So how do we choose the topics? I think that depends a little bit on where you're teaching. So it's going to
your audience
depends on exactly on your audience and depends on the teacher's interests and so on. Chile is actually a great country for us to be doing this because they have a mandatory economics education program in high schools, and so there's a natural point of contact there. And like in the U.S., there's very few people with even an undergraduate degree in economics who are teaching those programs. These are typically taught by history teachers or other area teachers who just don't know. Maybe they've taken an economics class at some point, but they're desperate for material. How can I teach my students the important questions in economics? And so they're very interested in the videos, and they're very interested in understanding, how can they take that material and flesh out in some cases, it's a year-long course out of that kind of material.
John, do you think there are certain elements of economics that the public is particularly lacking in education? Because when you talk about like high school to 90, it can be very broad, the audience that you're potentially talking to. And I assume that, you have goals for this to go everywhere, right? So
world domination.
Exactly.
We're not asking for a lot. World domination.
Yeah.
Why stop on Earth?
Aren't some folks going to Mars?
But when you look at the level of education within the American public in particular, are there specific pockets that you're trying to fill?
I think all
of it. Yeah.
You have to be careful, of course, because when you say all, then your audience is none. They obviously have to be people who are constantly curious, because it's really hard to teach people who are not curious, or at least have they're a little bit monomaniacal in a way, right? I mean, what Rob said earlier is exactly correct. I've written some popular books and we write a bunch of academic papers. And that part is not the hard part. The hardest part is getting people to actually pick it up, read it, and digest it.
Yeah.
And, we think that our goal, of course, is to say anyone who picks it up and is willing to be curious and take a look, we have to convert. we have to close that deal. So our goal is to convey Chicago economics in the most digestible way, but also convey the import of it and display and convey why this is important for your life. But it is true, the hardest part is actually getting people to say, I want to take a look. And there it's hard because you could get a high schooler who wants to do that to put something on their resume for college. You could do it because they're curious. Now you could have a voter like my dad who says, I really want to learn about tariffs because I hear about tariffs all the time in the news and I don't really know what to think because when I turn on CNN, I hear one thing. When I listen to President Reagan's old radio addresses, I hear something that's similar. But then when I hear what President Trump says, it's altogether different. And I just don't really even understand what's going on with, for example, tariffs. This is something that our program and E for E can help. Because we're economists. We're not Democrats. We're not Republicans. We're economists. So we sort of dispassionately say, here's what it is.
Yeah.
And there is very little normative judgment in these. It's sort of along the lines of, here's a tariff, here's how it affects the economy, and here's some empirical evidence for it. But the empiricism is still developing, whether free trade is good for a country or not. There's serious debate about that. I think it's fair to say because of the equity, partly because of the equity.
Well, I would put that a little bit differently. Something that Greg and I try very hard to teach in our course is we can reach
Greg Kaplan,
I'm sorry, who I co-teach the course of the University of Chicago with. We try very hard to teach that we can reach potentially agreement on if we impose this tariff, how will it affect this group of workers, this group of consumers, this group of downstream producers, and so on. Where reasonable people might disagree, even regardless of how much data we collect, is on how they value those types of trade-offs. So you might say, okay, I understand what that tariff is going to do, and despite the losers from that tariff, there's enough winners who I care enough about that I think we should implement this, and I might disagree with you. And that's a question about moral judgments, normative questions that I don't think I have a special expertise or claim to fame on. But on the positive issues, I think we can actually, there's quite a bit of evidence out there. Maybe we need more on some things, but there's quite a bit of evidence on what tariffs do and who they impact and how much they gain and how much they lose from them.
So I think that's a great example of why this kind of knowledge base is important because it does, it comes into the news so often, and this is a great example, like tariffs. It is one of the words of the year this year.
We were sorry to interrupt you, but we were actually teaching in April. We pivoted to we moved our tariff week 1 week earlier during the so-called Liberation Week, which I think was April 2.
Yeah, it was early April. Yeah.
So we pivoted and talked about tariffs at that time, and the ability to talk about exactly the kinds of things that were dominating the headlines during that week, and not about in some very abstract way, but very concretely about the kinds of questions that students were asking themselves, their parents were asking, and so on. It was fantastic.
So that's a great example of how to have knowledge about something that's in the news. John, you said that one of the things that's really important is to give people a sense of why they should have this knowledge base, right? So make that case. Why is it important? What is so special about economics that it needs something like this? Why is it important for that seminarian to come in and learn this, for the humanities major to come in?
No, I think it's fair to say that, John, if you think life is economics and economics is life, just prove it. Convince me.
That's a shorter version of
convince me. That's fair. Let me start by saying the kids walk into my classroom and I say, how many of you use Facebook and Instagram? And nearly all of them raise their hand. And I say, is it free? Forget about the data privacy issues, et cetera.
Yeah.
I say, is it free? And they say, yeah, you don't have to pay anything. And then I ask them, what about the time that you've spent? And then that opens up a discussion about the opportunity cost of time. So a foundational concept that's really hard to understand. But when you say, wow, I spend an hour or 4 hours a day on Instagram, this guy's telling me I should be asking myself, if I wasn't doing that, what would I be doing? What's the next best use of my time, opportunity cost? And we can monetize that. So I say, what if you had a part-time job and it's $10 per hour or $20 per hour? Those 4 hours are $40 to $80 a day. And then what would you consume with that? Savings, etc. This is a constant decision that people make. How should I allocate my time? Students think about, even before they come to me, if we reach high schoolers, should I go to college? Is college worth it?
Yeah.
Even before that, they say, should I do an after-school tutoring program to get higher SAT or ACT scores? And that's just part of this. You can think about what happens in the family, fertility rates. You can think about whether I should vote or not. You can think about whether I should give to a charitable cause or not. You can think about, should I leave jobs? Should I quit? What's the opportunity cost of not quitting? Where's my comparative advantage? Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Nearly everything that you do in your life, and we haven't even gotten to the business world or governmental decisions where policymaking relies on benefit cost analysis and on economic analysis. And everyday firms are talking about, how should we price? What should be the product offering? What kinds of ads should we put out? Are the ads actually working? What should our wages be for our workers? What should the levels be? Should wages be transparent? Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Every one of these questions is an economics question. I dare you to find a place in your life or a decision that you have to make that will not involve economic reasoning. Once you sit back and think about it, it's true. I should know something about economic theory. I should know something about what is the empirical evidence. And these are just individual decisions. So you have individuals, you have organizations, but then you have markets. How do all these individuals or firms interact in markets? And what should we be expecting for equilibrium outcomes? And if we want to change the equilibrium outcomes, what do taxes do? We always talk about, should the rich be taxed more? Should the poor be taxed less? Should there be more subsidy programs? All of these are economic questions, and they can be answered with economic reasoning and economic analysis. And it's both economic thought and it's empiricism. And then it ramps up to, what does equilibrium look like? I hope I've convinced you. Wow, she's a tough nut to crack. Everybody take a shot at it.
I thought John was great, so I only have a little.
No,
bit to
honestly,
add
I mean,
to
that's the reason why I love being an economics journalist, because it does. You cover the waterfront.
Yeah.
I think one thing that occurs to everybody at some point, maybe a little bit after they're an undergraduate, but not long after, maybe before that, is that what happens in the economy affects their life in all sorts of ways. So, your wage is something which is determined largely by the market. Maybe there's a little bit of bargaining or things like that there, but to a large extent, how much you get paid depends on the career you go into, how good you are at that career, and there are a lot of things which are well beyond what you do. And there's a feeling often that maybe there's something unfair about that. Why should it be that somebody who works, really hard as a nurse through the pandemic gets paid less than a basketball player? Is there something wrong with that? And I think that naturally leads into questions about whether markets are the right way to run a system. And there's a lot of idealized views out there. We should just do something, get a different allocation. People say, the world would be better if it looked in some different way. I think the questions that we try to address by tackling policies head on is not asking questions about, can you imagine that you would write down a fiction book which would have a world which is better than our world? The question is, can you imagine policies that maybe they don't even seem like feasible policies. Maybe nobody would vote for them today. Mm-hmm. But can you even imagine what those policies would be that would actually lead us to a world which in your view is better? And surely there are some policies which would improve the world. But trying to get them to understand that it's not a question about, we should just eliminate poverty. That's a great ideal, but that's not a policy. That's not a policy. Yeah. So the question is, what are the policies that you would do? And then once you start thinking about those policies, Do they actually achieve the aim, and do they achieve it in a way where you're willing to accept the trade-offs that come from that?
A good example that Rob just brought up was markets.
Mm-hmm.
So all of our students will take Uber or Lyft. Nearly everyone. All of you probably have taken.
I took one this
Uber.
morning.
Took one this morning. So you remember what life used to be like.
I'm old enough to remember
I'm old
time
enough to
before
remember.
Uber.
So you tell the story about, what life used to be like is you'd land at Logan Airport in Boston or at O'Hare, and you would wait in a half-hour line
Yep.
for the taxi. And it was wait time that allocated the taxi. That's a way.
And
Yeah.
in
So
Hyde
organic.
Park, you didn't get
Hyde
a
Park, you
taxi.
just didn't get it. No supply, because there's some areas that just are not covered. Okay. So you say that's one kind of market. The innovation with Uber and Lyft is that they added price to this market. They added an app that you can go in, you open up the app, and you say, I want to go to the airport. And it gives you a wait time called an ETA, gives you a delivery time, and it gives you a price. You could take it, or you could look at Lyft or look at Uber or look at a taxi or go to the train. But now prices are clearing that market. And you can say to the students, what do you think? And they can all afford it typically, so they're okay with it. But then you ask the question, what if only 5% of people could afford it in this new way? Is it still okay to have price clear the market, or should we now have wait time? Or back in the day, it was might makes right? It was whoever was the strongest got it. But the history of humankind, there have been all kinds of markets. We just tend to like, most of the time, prices to clear markets.
I'll add to that example. If you were a medallion owner in New York,
Exactly.
you lost a lot of money
Absolutely.
from Uber and Lyft. So there, all these innovations, there's winners and losers.
Yeah. So Rob went to the supply side. So then there are supply side things that happen, and then you can talk about, is it fair for potential drivers that you have to own a medallion?
Yeah.
And these medallions in Chicago, I think, were $800,000, $900,000.
Yeah, no, New York, well over $1 million.
And that was back, I was chief economist at Uber back then, and there were all kinds of lawsuits in localities and taxi cab unions basically coming after Uber. And there was this constant fight about whether it's fair to enter in this way. So now you get to some interesting issues on the supply side, including issues in law and economics that you can talk about. So you can just see how this can come to life.
Yeah.
Now, the key is to have a professor who's passionate about it, who wants to teach it and wants to think hard about these issues, because what Rob said earlier is the easiest class to teach is to walk in and write down math formulas. That's by far the easiest class to teach.
And I'll add easy to grade as well,
Yeah.
because your answer is right or wrong at the end of the day.
Right.
It's easy to
not
just,
subjective.
it's easy to shroud your misunderstanding in math. Hey, it's in the math, look. It's super hard to get rid of all of the math, all of the economies, and say, let's just talk brass tacks, but stay true to the math.
Yeah.
Anyone can go up there and speak nonsense and speak gibberish and speak right or left-ish.
Yeah.
That's not what this is about. This is about staying true to the science and teaching the science in a way that's digestible without all the economies.
Rob, you talked a little bit about policy, and I know you both have said, this is politically just like not left, not right, agnostic. That said, I wonder if your goals for this program at all include an extension to, say, better economic policy.
I think one thing that would be great that we haven't done yet, we've had some discussions about, is, in addition to outreach programs of teaching teachers, would be to teach policymakers.
Yeah.
So local policymakers. My general impression is that there's a large group of people who wish that they understood economics better. It's not that they think economics is a problem for them. It's that they're trying to do the best that they can to achieve their objectives, but not really understanding how economic tools and policy tools are going to help or hurt them in getting to those objectives. So I believe that's something that we could be doing and we will be doing more of, which is trying to reach out to, say, local policymakers, state policymakers. Maybe there's some scope in the federal government as well, to help them to understand economics and be better at things like program evaluation, policy evaluation, and also thinking ex ante, based on other historical examples about what types of policies are likely to work and which are likely to backfire.
How do you measure a program like this, the success of something like this? You look down the road 5 years, 10 years, 2 years, and what do you hope to see?
I think there's a lot of different answers to that. So, there's relatively narrow answers, which is you can test the students within the class. That's not your 2 to 5 year answer, but you can try to think of whether you've affected how they think within the class. Ideally, we would be able to follow people up and see what happens to them 5 years later. When we take high school students, do we change the decisions that they make about where to go to college or whether to go to college, what to major in when they go to college, related to some of the issues that John had talked about. But a lot of it's also softer things, and students who come back to you after they took the class and they say, hey, when that tariff issue came up, E4E really helped me a lot in thinking through whether this was a good idea or not. And I understood that there's people who are going to gain and people who are going to lose from the tariffs. And, here's
maybe I can help explain it to my mom and dad.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, for sure. Over the Thanksgiving table on how, on the quality of the discussion that you have there. So I think there's a lot of softer things like that as well. Of course, what's our long run goal? My long run goal is to improve both the economic decisions that people make in their own lives that John talked a lot about before, but also the way that people think about things as voters or as policymakers, as community leaders in the types of policies that they advocate for to improve economic policy in the U.S. and around the world.
Yeah, I agree with all that. So where I usually start is with inputs. And you say, how many students at the University of Chicago are exposed to this class? And how many students are we teaching? That's growing fast, and I think it's probably the most popular class on campus. So that's good.
It's limited only by the size of our largest classroom at this point.
That and our teachers, our professors. And then you look at website activity. So things like how many downloads are we getting and what is the interest there? And then once you go outside, you start to say, okay, how many high schools in America are we in? And how many students within those high schools are we affecting? And then Rob talked about, well, you can track those. We're trying to work with Jim Nondorf and others to track them and see, are people more likely to put economics as their interest or their major when they apply to the University of Chicago? So that's a short-run effect that you're trying to affect the way people are thinking about allocating their time and their interests. And then you go broadly and you can talk about where's the program expanding to. Rob talked earlier about Chile. We had a program taught in Bogota. We're expanding to the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. So you do have some expansion there. But again, those are all inputs. You hope that those inputs map to outputs you care about. You could say, what do you care about? People making the right decisions and policymakers making the right decisions.
You don't know what's happening in that voting booth that you're hoping people bring the knowledge into.
So it's difficult.
We know at the locality level. I've done work on that. We know who votes, and then we know how the locality worked out in terms of 60-40.
True.
Yeah, so you do know that. That's in a paper that I've recently written. But I think on that front, I've been working a little bit on the science of adopting science. So we're scientists. We produce scientific insights. That's great. But the next step is, do those insights scale to the next level? Because if you're just solving things in the Petri dish in a way that's interesting, but kind of who cares, you're not changing the world, you really want implementation. That's part of the science of using science. But the other part is, how can we get policymakers interested in the science and actually adopting the science. So I call this a political economy of adoption of field experimental results in a recent paper. That's a Becker-Friedman working paper. And that's a little more difficult. We're working with policymakers to see exactly what does a presentation need to look like to get policymakers, let's say, interested and persuaded.
So you need a little psychology there,
You
too.
need a little psychology. We call that behavioral economics.
Yeah, there
part
you
of
go.
behavioral economics. But that's an entirely sort of new line of research that's in the same vein as the old political economy work within economics, that it is an area of research that is starting up. And I think here at Chicago we'll be part of that. And E for E has to be part of that as well. Because in the end, if you want to change the world, you do need to change policymakers. But to change policymakers, you need to understand, why aren't policymakers adopting all of the science that they should be adopting? Is it because they realize it will never scale? Maybe. Is it because they realize that there's uncertainty and that it might not work? Maybe. Maybe they're not adopting it because it's not going to affect a particular client of theirs or a clientele of theirs. Maybe. But these are the things I think that economics can speak to. And E for E will have a say in that discussion.
I don't think any of this is quick. It's not something where we can say, if we teach this, first of all, we're going to scale and reach, let's say, only 1 billion people in a couple of years. So everyone's is a long ways out. And two is that, for people, you can hope to move the needle a little bit through one class. I don't think we're going to change people in one class. We're going to completely change how people view things. But all these things matter, and I think we can make a difference by reaching enough people and having a small influence on them. We can move aggregate outcomes.
You both have done an excellent job of making the case for economics. That said, there are news reports all the time that talk about massive declines in basic skills, particularly among U.S. public school students. So you're wanting to add another layer to this after, math, reading, writing. Do you worry about tilting at windmills a bit at all?
Certainly worry, yes, but I think that what we're talking about are issues which affect people in real life. And I think one question that students have a lot is, when am I ever going to use this outside of the next exam? There's a lot of issues that come up in economics. I think everything that we talk about in our class, I think everything John talks about in his class, these are issues which the students are either confronting at that point or, as being, they will be confronting in the near future. So one advantage that we have over a lot of kind of more abstract things is these are real issues to people. These are things that students care about.
I think that's right. Look, your question basically is, are you guys wasting your time? Don't you guys have anything?
It was
better?
softer than
Don't
that.
you have anything better to do? Don't you economists have anything better to do? Why aren't you on?
Yeah, that's exactly what I said, John.
Interest rates, something like this. No, but it is a good question. Look, if you believe in the product and you believe in what we're teaching, which obviously we do,
Mm-hmm.
we're willing to put our names behind it, our lives behind it, then you have to say, do you believe in how it can change the world? Do you believe that it can really affect the way people will operate in their lives, in the way organizations will change potentially or operate themselves? When you teach a science like econ, that to me is really about a way to think about problems. Once you learn that way to think about problems, it's really hard to unlearn it. It's one of these things that once you see it, it's really hard to unsee it. So it's not like a lot of the things that you've brought up so far, where exactly as Rob said, you learn it, but then you say, look, am I going to ever need to apply that in my life? I don't think I do. So I'm probably not going to retain it. And if I ever need it, I'll just go on Google or go on Gemini or Claude or whatever, and I'll just type it in.
Right.
And I'll get Pythagorean's theorem from that. And so why would I care about that?
Yeah.
What we're talking about here is a tool a way of thinking that when you're in the living room, you use it. When you're with your friends, you use it. When you go to Starbucks, you use it. When you go to work, you use it. When you're in conference calls, when you're on a Zoom call, this is what we're really talking about here is augmenting critical thinking skills. In today's world, with today's new technologies, I cannot think of a better way to teach and make somebody better than to augment their critical thinking skills. This particular critical thinking skill happens to be important because it's ubiquitous. How to think about every decision you will be making and the advice that you will be making. That's economic thinking. Again, you might eschew that kind of thinking, but once you hear it, like, it's really hard to get rid of this. It's really hard to forget about, wow, if I go to Susie's, I can't go to Jimmy's. And that's what I'm missing out on. Once you hear that, and once you hear somebody tell you, it's okay to quit. It's the optimal quitting rule. That if you keep digging down the same try well, like my parents taught me, Johnny, you never quit. Quitters never win. Winners never quit.
Yep.
But economics will say, look, what's the opportunity cost of continuing to drill down this well that's probably dry? It's that you can't drill down another well, and you can't have another great idea. That comes from just standard foundational economic thinking. Once you get that in your brain, it's really hard to get it out. So I think the stickiness is important here.
I think it's also related to just the way that they're going to encounter the economy affecting their lives. So they're going to see, my parent lost their job, or they're going to see I'm having difficulty in getting a job, and trying to understand what's going on with that. How does the world affect you in that way?
When you see gains and losses in your 401k,
for example,
that's not a math problem for you. It's an economics problem.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's a life problem for you.
Yes, that's for sure.
So these are problems that we're encountering all the time. These are real issues that we see day to day in our lives, and that seem like external forces that are affecting us, but they're not. I mean, they are external to us. But they are things that can be influenced by the policy choices that are being made, and they can be understood using economic tools.
What's next for the program?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
So we have, there's a lot of different ideas that we have. The more immediate things are kind of expansion along the same lines of what we've been doing. So I talked about one program we're running in Chile. John mentioned something in Colombia and Saudi Arabia. We have a number of different things like that are in the pipeline to continue to expand, with the idea of how can we leverage the very limited resources that we have available at the University of Chicago to get these ideas out in a quality way to a large number of people in the U.S. and around the world. What's after, like the bigger ideas than that?
I don't know about bigger, but let me give you two specific things that I plan on working on. One is a new book called The Data Trap. And the data trap is really about judgment and decision-making, and about determining what evidence is actionable. So we get a lot of evidence in our lives, a lot of data. Like the internet's a data machine now, and AI is a data machine. I think what's difficult in this morass is what is truly causal and what is correlational. So I think we can develop a better understanding of that. In fact, we have cause and effect is one of our lessons in economics for everyone. So I'm on the verge of writing a popular book called The Data Trap that will talk about the traps that society gives us in thinking that, hey, this is causal, when it's really like pushing on a string and it's not causal. And then I want to teach about what evidence do you need to ensure it's causal. So that's one brand. The other brand is going all the way to the other end of the age distribution, and that's children's books. So looks like there will be a 10 book series on the 10 foundational concepts that parents can teach their children. Now, there's a little secret here. Even though they're first to third grade books, it's really also about teaching the parent.
Sure.
So we had a parent academy in the Chicago Heights Early Childhood Center that I started back in 2010. And part of it was teaching the 3 to 5-year-old children. The other part was teaching the parents how to teach the child. And we learned a lot about what are the best ways to teach parents in those parent academies. So I'm bringing that knowledge to these kids' books. So at the end, there will be a page teaching the parent how to teach this concept to their child. So there, I hope, of course, I want the child to learn, the child to really like these fun stories about economics, but it's really meant to target the parent and to get the parent interested in some of these concepts, like comparative advantage, for example, or what's an interest rate. So I think that's the left part of the distribution where E for E is going. And then the right part, at least in my world, is the data trap. I think the data trap will really help people. It's a critical thinking type of story, but it's a very specific critical thinking type story on when is it truly causal? Because you open up, whatever it is, X or Instagram or TikTok or whatever, and you see these compelling statements. And then people say, well, whenever I wear my Philadelphia Eagles football jersey, we win. Stuff like this. And my mom always thought that.
Superstition economics.
There's beliefs in it.
There's beliefs. So my mom always thought that after lunch, you needed to rest for 45 minutes before you'd go swim. Next door there's that bump swimming pool. And she really believed that the ice cream cone, because she saw a figure that said in cities where there's more ice cream cone consumption, there are more drownings. So she said ice cream cone consumption causes drownings. Wow. Lo and behold, there's a third lurking variable called heat. Heat causes you to swim more, and it causes you to eat more ice cream.
Yep.
So it's just lurking. That's chapter 1 in the data trap, which is always try to understand if there's a lurking variable, a third variable. This is really economic thinking and using logic and critical thinking skills to figure out, is this a string I'm pushing against, or is it real? The amount of resources we waste are just tremendous.
Yeah. Is that going to be a new chapter in the E4E at some point?
It sort of is melded throughout.
Yeah.
If you would go and watch all those videos, and I thought it was 44, but Rob said 60, so I'm going to take it for his word. I'd like 60 more than 44. If you would go into all of those and pull out John List's greatest hits in there, I think you might be able to build a lot of the data trap. I do. And the way I think about it is it's really a prequel to my other work. And the y-axis is really about why everyone should run field experiments. And the voltage effect was really about be careful, because if your field experiment worked in Chicago Heights, how do we know it's going to work in Philly or Toronto or any other city around the U.S.? And then that was about the science of using science. But what I've learned in my travels, whether it's in the White House or at Walmart or Uber or Lyft, is that there's something more foundational that needs to be taught. And that's simply, can I believe that this evidence is actionable or not? Forget about scaling. Forget about I'm going to run a field experiment. What about the evidence that I'm reading right now? Is that actionable? And I saw the same problem in the White House. I see the same problem in every organization I work with. It's a really, really hard skill to understand that's actionable. Let's go all in versus let's tap the brakes here a little bit and figure out if it's truly actionable. So I think that's going to be a part. It has been a part of E for E, but it will be a bigger part of the learning for E as well.
Kind of, one other thing that we're working on, this will be a little vaguer than John's concrete things, but it's related to AI and maybe related to some of the questions you were asking at the beginning. I feel like with AI in education now, we're kind of at a place of, imagine you were a high school teacher who set long division questions, and then suddenly your students got calculators at home.
Right.
And so the homework questions became kind of pointless because they're all just going to solve the problems on their calculator instead of actually doing the long division that you had assigned them. Somewhere between then and now, we came to realize that students can use for for math, they can use these calculators, and that can allow us to do a lot of other things beyond long division when we set them homework assignments. I think with AI, we're at the same place where we're used to setting essay questions, and we talked about we're teaching in different ways when because we're not using math, we need to assign them questions more like essay questions. But we're afraid to set those questions because they're just going to put a prompt into ChatGPT and say, answer this question like a good high school or college student would answer it, and hand that essay in. What we think we can do, and we're still exploring this, is to really use AI to set up something like what I think would be what we really want, which is to put the student one-on-one in a room with John List or with me, and have them engage in like a tutorial with them, ask questions, see whether they're asking good questions or not, and evaluate them based on the feedback between them, as you would do during an oral examination, except that we can do that at scale and in a consistent way. Our AIs don't get tired and they're able to make appointments at 2 a.m. and so on. So we're at the early stages of exploring that, but I think the format for E4E lends itself to that very well. And that also gives us, that if we can figure this out, it gives us translation possibilities. You can do that in Spanish. You can do that in Arabic as easily as you can do it in English. So we're excited about those possibilities.
Oh, it sounds fabulous. All right. Well, at the end of every show, we have a lightning round. So are you both prepared?
No.
Well, we're going to do it anyway.
We're fingers crossed. We never know what's going to happen next. We're going on this roller coaster. Is this going to be a good one down, or is it going to be one of those poorly ones?
These are going to stump you.
Okay. All right. Let's focus, Rob.
Okay.
Focus.
What book or books are you currently reading, or would you recommend?
This is difficult. I read John's books.
Oh, gosh. What book am I currently reading? I am reading a fair number of textbooks in experimental economics, and they are more historical textbooks. I'm thinking about Fisher in the work back in the 20s and 30s, and the statistical design textbooks from Stats. And the reason why is because I am publishing a PhD book in experimental economics and an undergraduate book in experimental economics. And I'm trying to figure out what are the best ways that the old masters thought about some of these problems, and what are the best ways that they've taught them. So my main readings have been older experimental methods books and methodology books. I'm not really much into science fiction or fiction itself. I think there's enough to like about the real world and enough fascinating things that happen in the real world.
You don't need the imaginary.
It's where I have my own imagination, but
Sure.
I tend to focus on the real world.
Rob?
So I guess the last book that I stole out of somebody's office was a book called Monopsony in Motion by Alan Manning. So there's a lot of work, and this is much more related to my research than economics for everyone. My research is on labor economics, and there's been a lot of interest in, especially in the last 5 or 10 years, about the idea that labor markets are characterized by so-called monopsony, where firms have a lot of market power in setting wages, and workers just kind of have to take whatever wage is out there. So it's different than the way my research has worked and my view of the labor market, but I think the only way to really confront something like that is to get deep into it and understand it. So that's my current task. I'll be teaching a advanced PhD class in the winter quarter. We'll cover this material, so I better learn something before that.
As long as you learn the day before your PhD student.
Right,
okay.
Yeah. What class changed your life when you were a student?
So economics for sure. I did not go in, as a college student, I did not go in thinking I was going to take any economics classes. I didn't really know what economics was when I started as an undergraduate.
What did you start in?
I didn't know, but probably history or
Okay.
something. Maybe I would become a lawyer. It wasn't clear exactly what. I remember taking an economics class, and this is related to something I said about the tariff week. It was a class taught as an undergraduate at Yale. John Giannakopoulos was the instructor, and was the week of the stock market crash in 1987. And John shifted from a pretty abstract class talking about, supply curves and demand curves and not doing the experiments that John was describing. John Giannakopoulos is a fantastic economist, by the way. But he shifted from that to talking about how stock markets work, what's bond prices and stock prices, and how are bond yields related to stock prices, and why was what was happening with the Fed related to what was happening in markets. And suddenly, instead of talking about this very abstract, dry subject that seemed, I was good at it because I could solve constrained optimization problems, we were talking about what was on the headlines of the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal. And so that week, I think, had it's probably why I got into economics.
Huh.
And I think it's also profoundly affected how I think about teaching economics for everyone.
John?
Can I cheat and do two?
You bet.
But I'll be fast. So the first one was my very first econ class that I took, and that was in high school by a teacher named George Conham. And why that was useful for me is because I finally found something that I was good at. Everyone else was struggling with the math, the graphing, and with the critical thinking. And I always just thought everything was obvious. Like, this is obvious. Why? And the same thing happened when I got into college. It was the same thing. Everyone really struggles with economics. Economics, I think the Econ 101 class really separates people, but I think it separates them mostly because of how it's taught. Not because there's something really deeply hard about it. It is true that you're learning a new language called Economist. You're learning some math, you're learning graphing, you're learning critical thinking skills. So all those are hard to teach at once, but economics in its beauty can be taught just like E for E is. So I think that was important because it taught me where my comparative advantage was. I wanted to be a professional golfer. And when I saw that I was never going to be good enough at college, and I went to the second best.
Oh, economist.
You can actually be an economist. So that was point number one. And class number two was during my first year at the University of Wyoming. I took a laboratory economics class, an experimental economics class, but it was all laboratory experiments. And I went into that class. I had been doing field experiments at these baseball card shows throughout the late 80s or early 90s. So I sit through this class in 92, 93. And I was a subject in the lab experiment, and I then saw the subsequent paper that was written.
Huh.
I learned that I was a firm in a duopoly, and I was making pricing decisions. And I started to think, wait a second here, that's not really how I constructed the situation.
Mm-hmm.
It feels like the constructs that I'm using at these baseball card shows where I have demand, supply, I have auctions, I have bargaining, I'm testing discrimination, et cetera, et cetera. It just seems more natural to do that. So that sort of confirmed in my mind that you might have a career in doing these field experiments, using the world as your lab and departing from where the field was at that point, which was bring students into a room and have students be a duopolist or be a monopolist or make a decision about how to tax polluters. So that really helped confirm to me where my career was going. And so it was sort of a class that inspired me that I was really on the right path. Now, when I started submitting the work in the early 90s to journals, journal editors and referees didn't agree with me. They agreed with the teacher.
Sure.
But in the end, it always comes to the right equilibrium. So I feel we're approaching the right equilibrium now in that field.
So did the career decision bear out for you? You want to share your handicap?
Oh, gosh, I'm still probably about a 3 or 4.
Okay.
So I'm still not good enough to make any money. But
All right.
people I played against in
Excellent
high school,
decision.
yeah, people I played against in high school, Steve Stricker, Jerry Kelly, Mario Tiziani, they've all become pros. And Steve Stricker even coached the Ryder Cup team.
Oh, my goodness.
I'm from Wisconsin. He's from Wisconsin as well. So
They just weren't as good economists.
this one is good. Exactly. They realize our comparative advantage. Bad luck for them. They're making millions golfing. Look at us.
Oh, jeez. All right. And finally, if you had to make a pie with the current contents of your kitchen, what would it be?
Oh, I bet there's a good chance we could whip up a pecan pie in there.
Pecan. Okay.
I make a good pecan pie. Every Thanksgiving I make a pecan pie.
Nice.
I like that. Well, I'm going to probably go strawberry pie.
Strawberry.
Strawberry guy. Yeah, I'm just thinking we have some strawberries there.
Even this late in the season.
Yeah, absolutely. Walmart Plus. Walmart still delivers. I don't know if you're a Walmart Plus member, but still delivering strawberries.
Still delivering strawberries. All right. Well, they both sound delicious. Thank you both so much for a conversation. Robert Shimer, John List. It's been absolutely fabulous. And again, the program is Economics
for everyone.
For
Economics
everyone.
For everyone. And that's the
With the number 4.
That's how creative we are. Go grab yourself a pie. Just watch Economics for Everyone.
Thank you both so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for having us. It was great to be here.